Some of the most compelling narratives in movies or TV are when we get to see characters come back from impossible or dead-end situations. Eminem's rap battles at the end of 8 Mile wouldn't be anywhere near as powerful if we hadn't just spent an hour watching him be nothing but a broke choke artist. It's normal to lose faith in someone's abilities if they continuously lose, and in MMA, it's also normal after a string of losses to think certain fighters are just never going to reach the top of the sport or be able to continue competing at the highest level. And of course, when those fighters find ways to turn their careers around or reinvent themselves, it's been so inspirational at times, a few of them could probably have been made into movie scripts themselves. I'm Balian from MMA On Point. A big thank you to our channel members, the Hall of Famers. Thanks guys for your support on every video. And these are 10 losses that look like career enders. Number 10, Andrei Arlovski versus Sergey Kharitonov. It's kind of wild to think about the amount of setbacks Arlovski's had in his career and managed to overcome. You might have thought it was already over when he lost to Wildman Vyacheslav Datsik in his very first fight, but he was just getting started. Of course, he would make it all the way to becoming UFC champion after debuting for the promotion back in 2000 and winning the belt in 2005. And yes, he had a few ups and downs over the years, but outside of title eliminators and title fights, he was looking great. In fact, by the time he lost to Fedor, he was leaving the UFC on a huge 5-fight win streak, even taking out guys like Verdum and Roy Nelson in the process. So Fedor sent that good fortune into a tailspin, and he would end up losing 4 fights in a row. It was this last KO against Sergey Kharitonov in Strikeforce that was so bad that it was incredibly hard for anyone to imagine him bouncing back.
Caught up on the cage and that leaping left hook caught him on the chin. He was a little bit wobbly already.
3 out of his last 4 fights knocked out cold, but he was still resolute after the fact, saying, quote, "First of all, I'm not going to finish my career like this. Definitely, I'm going to keep fighting, and I know it's impossible to fix all these problems. Honestly, I don't know why I keep losing."
Every fight for me is like first fight right now. 2.5 years, 4 losses in a row, and yeah.
And these losses were so bad, he was essentially sent into relegation with the regional promotions and fighting guys who don't even have wiki pages, or Travis Fulton, who was way past his best years at that point. But it would prove to be exactly what Arlovski needed. In these fights, he'd start to gain his confidence back. In fact, over the next 4 years, he'd only lose a single time in 10 fights, that being to an unstoppable Rumble Johnson. So this would get him another contract in the UFC, but guys, he made it all the way to a title eliminator fight with Stipe Miocic, and this was 16 years after he'd made his UFC debut. Of course, Stipe won, and we all know where that story went, and sadly this would prove to be the last brush with championship hopes, but it shows he had a ton more in him than the Kharitonov loss when we all thought it was over way back in 2011. Unlike the rest of the entries going forward though, he was not able to win championship gold again, so let's talk about that. Number 9, Justin Gaethje versus Dustin Poirier. Before the UFC, the man we now know as a technical KO artist had dedicated himself to a flat-out, balls-to-the-wall MMA brawling style that managed to carry him to 17-0. His entire game plan revolved around the belief he could outwork anyone. And when he came to the UFC in 2017, he downright said he refused to change this style ever, despite being asked if it was going to work at the highest level.
I can't be knocked out. Duh. It's what the sport is. We punch each other in the face. I take too much damage. Okay, I haven't taken a hard enough punch because I'm 17-0 with 14 knockouts.
And in his debut against Michael Johnson, we saw the same thing. 10 minutes of war eventually breaking down his opponent. But didn't matter if we didn't think it was going to work. Justin 100% believed in his abilities. But then he ran into Eddie Alvarez, a man who's been in some of the greatest lightweight wars of all time.
Man, another fight I feel privileged to see, Shan. Privileged to call.
Justin did the same thing in this fight, but Eddie was the first man to be able to weather the storm, beat up his body, and finished Gaethje in the 3rd round. It was an amazing fight, and for the first time, Justin didn't break his opponent. Next up was Dustin Poirier, and he went 4 rounds this time before Gaethje's move forward at any cost style again didn't work. Right there and then, it was clear the World Series of Fighting version of himself, the chaotic brawler, that style he refused to let go of, just clearly wasn't going to work at the highest level.
I definitely had no regard for my health. I was going into fights, I wanted to break them. I never thought about not getting punched or not taking strikes. After those 2 losses, I was able to step back and be like, I never trusted in my skills because I didn't care about my skills. I just knew that I was more aggressive, more tenacious, and I wanted it more than these guys.
And all these changes translated into immediate and violent success. He started getting getting first-round knockouts, and that streak culminated in an interim title where he dismantled and effectively ended Tony Ferguson's career, definitively proving that he was at championship level in the UFC. And while he was never able to win undisputed gold, between this, the BMF, and the tremendous fights he's put on since, there's no doubt those two losses were just the beginning and not the end. Number 8, Jose Aldo versus Max Holloway 2. One of the most gutting things, as exciting as it was at the time, was watching Jose Aldo react to his 13-second KO loss to Conor McGregor. And that's because we all knew how good Aldo was. Of course, a bunch of new Conor fans didn't see all those great Aldo fights, and for a time it looked like it was all starting to get overshadowed, at least for the masses. And despite the fact he won his title back quickly against Frankie Edgar, those fans still didn't see it. And it didn't help that immediately after this, he suffered 2 more devastating losses to Max Holloway. Even the most dedicated fans among us started to think the walls were closing in on him. And amongst all this doubt, there was still an unwavering amount of, well, almost surprising positivity from Aldo. But the reality was, he just got knocked out in 3 championship fights. So the thought was perhaps Jose's next walk to the octagon would be to the gallows. But instead, he absolutely crushed Jeremy Stevens' liver and then unbelievably knocked out Renato Moicano. And wow, have those aged well. Of course, he had some losses to some all-time greats and after that champions, but who wouldn't? The fact is, he got right back after it, and think about who he took out. Chito Vera, Pedro Munez, Rob Font. Guys, these have aged super well. The longevity of his career is insane, and over this amount of time, with the continued great wins he's earned, even the most jaded fan has had no choice but learn to appreciate this man's accomplishments. Don't even get me started about that Hall of Fame acceptance speech either.
When I was 17 years old, I saw the UFC game at a friend's house, and I said, I'm gonna be in the UFC, and I'm gonna become a champion.
Number 7, Dustin Poirier versus Michael Johnson. The MMA doc Fightville in 2011 gave Dustin Poirier tons of fan attention before even his UFC debut, which also then happened to come against Josh Grisby, a guy booked to fight the frickin' champ Jose Aldo until it was cancelled, and then when Poirier instead beat him up for 3 rounds, all that hype exploded. And this would translate into a 4-fight win streak that even included a young Max Holloway. This man was on track to a title.
145-pound division, get ready, I'm coming, kick in the teeth.
But things took a sudden turn. Out of nowhere, the Korean Zombie put on an all-time classic to finish Poirier in a fight everyone thought Dustin would win. And when he got a top contender in Cub Swanson, he just sort of didn't really show up. So by the time he was knocked out by Conor McGregor, most fans were ready to believe that Dustin could be just honestly your typical middle-of-the-stack fighter.
It was really down, as low as I can get my body to at 145. It was tough. It made fight week not enjoyable.
And while things would improve with a move to lightweight, the troubles weren't over, as Dustin would get knocked out again, this time by Michael Johnson, who himself had just lost 2 in a row and was basically fighting for his job.
My back's against the wall. I had to fight my way off of it. I still feel like my back's against the wall. So my next victim has to deal with that.
Fights that kind of unfold like that, I get emotional, man. And every time I get emotional, I make huge mistakes. And I just need a fight technique, and don't make it personal.
Clearly, though, something clicked following that Johnson loss, because he would massively turn it up and begin taking out some all-time greats. Anthony Pettis, Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez. And these weren't just good performances, they were incredible fights. He even took out Max Holloway again, this time at the height of his reign, moving up to compete for the interim title. Even if he couldn't win the undisputed belt, he had 3 championship fights, proving that he was championship level, and if it wasn't for 2 of the pound-for-pound best, perhaps he would have become undisputed champion. Number 6, Sean Strickland versus Alex Pereira. At first, it felt like Sean Strickland was just getting nowhere with his UFC run. He'd got no traction at all from the fan base after 4 years, but it was crazily a motorbike accident that changed everything. He was out for 2 years, and when he came back during the pandemic era, he really fought like a fighter who had nothing left to lose, or felt like he had no more time to waste. In just 9 months, he beat 4 guys and had banked considerable screen time with all those fans sat at home, and they were finally getting behind him, and all of that led to a UFC pay-per-view where he took full advantage at the press conference.
You guys are a bunch of vicious bastards. Man, here's the way you guys talk. I want to go down there and punch all you fuckers in the face.
And Strickland was also starting shit with the champ Izzy and getting himself hyped for that fight.
No man that beats off the cartoons is gonna beat me.
It took the Brazilian just 2.5 minutes to find the kill shot, and all of Strickland's hype came to a screeching halt. The year ended in disaster, made worse by the fact that Pereira was now the champ, and in the eyes of fans, well, Sean was never going to beat that guy, so he would never be champ himself. And to make matters worse, he'd lost another fight by the end of the year, and it just wasn't looking good. But just 1 month after that loss, he took advantage of a short notice opportunity and scored a big win over Nasruddin Imavov, which totally changed things. Another win, and the opportunity of a lifetime came out of nowhere. Dricus du Plessis was out of his highly anticipated fight with Israel Adesanya, and to anyone watching this, did you honestly think he was going to win? I don't really believe you, because virtually everyone picked Izzy to just school him, but that is not what happened at all. One of the most shocking upsets ever, and Shan dominated the fight. Just 1 year ago, he'd been completely counted out as simply not being skilled enough. And now, who could argue? Even in his loss to DDP, a ton of fans had good reason to think he won. What a career turnaround, man. Number 5, Rampage Jackson versus Shogun Rua. Talk about one of the best in his era, but for a time, it didn't really look like Rampage was going to be championship material. After 2 incredibly vicious Wanderlei Silva KOs, well, it's tough to get a third title shot against the same guy, isn't it? To make matters worse, an unimpressive decision win over Murilo Rua didn't help things, which also perhaps sent his younger brother Shogun into a frenzy, and his revenge was a complete and total one-sided beating.
When you get knocked out once, it's easy to get knocked out each time. Master!
And as if now 3 horrible losses to the Shootbox team wasn't enough, in Rampage's own words, Pride management started to see him as less valuable and began treating him that way. But as he left Japan, American promotions came calling. Make no mistake about it, he was a huge star, no matter what the Pride execs may have said. So immediately he was thrust into a main event with Matt Lindland that wasn't the greatest, but allowed him to get a win over a recognized name, and then the UFC practically bought out the WFA just for his contract. And they offered something very valuable: redemption. He KO'd Marvin Eastman and took back one of his early losses before another crack at Chuck Liddell, who he'd already beaten 4 years prior. And this time it took him less than 2 minutes to KO the UFC's biggest star ever. Now, while he wasn't able to hold on to the title for very long, he did get that sweet revenge over Wanderlei as well, knocking him out. From that Shogun loss to becoming champion and KOing Vandy, yeah, I'd say this was a massive bounce back. Number 4, Michael Bisping versus Luke Rockhold. It's easy to lose faith in a sports team, but always rally behind them every time they go for another championship. And as a fan, this is what Bisping's career felt like. Every time he got close to getting a title shot, he'd have a tough loss or a setback and end up starting the process all over again. How about the Dan Henderson KO for starters? Or what about the Chael Sonnen loss?
Yeah, I got hit so hard in the first round. He hurt me so bad that it's one of those deals. I didn't fully understand where we were, what we were doing.
Who could forget TRT Vitor? Even Tim Kennedy. Time and time again, he'd set himself up for a run towards the belt, but he just couldn't beat the guy he needed to. And in the wake of all that, he ran into Luke Rockhold, and let's be real, he was likely there to just boost Rockhold. He was 3-3 in his last 6 fights, and Luke was a -550 favorite. And then when he did submit Mike in the second round, well, it was pretty much a loss that looked to be, a nail in his coffin. How many title eliminators had he been in and lost at this point? Now 3-4, with basically just one eye. It didn't look good. But the one thing about Bisping that never went anywhere, despite all the fading fan support, was perseverance. He refused to back down. Just think about when he basically got KO'd by Anderson Silva. He got back up and dominated the rest of the fight. Or how about while shooting a movie, accepting the last-minute replacement title shot at, guess who? Yeah, Luke Rockhold.
I'm ready to go. I get to punch Luke Rockhold in the face. I get to become world champion. I'm a happy man. There ain't no processing.
Again, his perseverance drove him through, and sure enough, he found that left hook Larry shot, and against all odds, he did it. He became world champion.
For everything that's said and done, I respect Luke a lot. I think he's a fantastic fighter, and we've had our ups and downs along the way. I have nothing against the guy. I really don't.
5 minutes later.
Ironic and very fitting, his redemption would be against the person you thought spelled the end of his career in only a year and a half's time. Number 3, Frank Mir versus Marcio Cruz. In 2004, Frank Mir had gone 8-1 as a heavyweight submission machine, won the world title at only 25, but then had a life-threatening accident which forced him to just drop everything completely.
He beat Tim Silva, won the title, great, yay, oh my God, youngest champion ever, it was so amazing, buys a motorcycle. And on his motorcycle, he gets hit by a car. And it wasn't the break that was the problem. It broke his leg in half, but it destroyed all of his tendons in his knee.
He was lucky to be alive, let alone ever fight again.
He was stripped of his title. He couldn't defend it. They told him he could never fight again.
And so at first, fans thought it was all over. A tragic end to one of the most promising young careers ever.
And I remember thinking, he's there. Like, I know it. I know this is not his destiny. This is not the end for Frank Mir. It just isn't.
Mir had also developed an addiction to pain pills he'd been taking, and when he did come back against Marcio Cruz, he'd still been struggling with them. Mir did not look like himself at all. Shockingly, Cruz would finish him in the first round. Not exactly the redemption arc everyone was hoping for. Frank would have a small comeback win after that against Dan Christensen, but he looked so out of shape and nothing like the guy who speed ran the division. But at least it was a win. That didn't last very long though, as by the end of the year, rising undefeated Muay Thai striker Brandon Vera did to Frank what some people thought just ended his career. A KO in just 1 minute, leading to a pivotal conversation with his wife.
He loses the fight, he's like, I just don't have it anymore. I just don't have it. So when he said that, I kind of just like snapped and I said, you are not this bitch of a person right now. Like, you're just not. Like, man up.
Definitely some tough love there, but it worked. Things completely turned around, and Mir did the hard work to overcome his pain pill addiction. He'd bounce back against Anthony Hardonk, take out Brock fucking Lesnar before actually achieving interim champ status over Big Nog. And it's all pretty insane when you think about it. Number 2, Glover Teixeira versus Alexander Gustafson. From 2006 to 2011, racking up 15 wins in a row at lightweight made Glover Teixeira one of the best outside the UFC. But visa issues kept him from competing, which was already probably bad enough to put him on this list.
Teixeira left his home country of Brazil for Connecticut in 2000, then left Connecticut for the Pit Fight team 2 years ago.
When he was finally brought into the promotion, he was already 33, so how much of a UFC career was he actually going to have? Well, he blew through his first 5 opponents and set himself up with a title shot in just 2 years. Sadly for him though, against John Jones, Teixeira didn't really have an answer for his rangy frame and lost a unanimous decision. And from here, Glover just kind of fell into the middle of the division, going on some decent streaks, but also losing to guys like Phil Davis and suffering gigantic KO losses to Anthony Johnson and Alexander Gustafson. Especially after that Gustafson fight, people were thinking the dream was over. And as bad as those losses were, another decision loss happened against Corey Anderson a few months later. And nearly everyone said it was time for Glover to hang it up, including Glover himself. It just didn't seem like he had another win streak left in him, let alone a title run. Glover told us in an interview exactly what it was that turned him around.
Working, I was already into meditation. I started meditation a few years back. Then I started thinking, start reading more. Respect the rest, I started studying about that. I went to the PI.
Certainly more of a cerebral approach, a mixture between the mental focus and practical application of improved training methods. So with this sea change now being applied to his life at the tender age of 40 years old, he started an unlikely 5-fight win streak journey that led him all the way to Jan Blachowicz and a second title shot, where he absolutely cut through the champ's defensives to finally become UFC champion. No one could have seen this coming after some of those losses just a few short years ago. Alright, how about some honourable mentions? Of course, we've got to talk about Charles Oliveira, where it looks like he just sort of quit early on. And of course, his last loss before his bounce-back streak was against Paul Felder, where it looked like he actually tapped to strikes. Of course, he'd go on to have an amazing streak and become UFC champion. Francis Ngannou was someone we wanted to talk about as well. Obviously, the Stipe loss initially was really bad for Francis, and his style just wasn't going to work against the champ. But then he had the Derek Lewis performance, where he looked absolutely gun-shy. Of course, he would completely bounce back and win the title looking better than he ever did. Number 1, Randy Couture versus Rico Rodriguez. When he first won the title in 1997, Randy Couture was already 34. And when he won the title back from Randleman, he was 37. Most careers are long gone by this point, right? And so when he was ironically beaten by the youngest champ ever, Josh Barnett, who, tested positive for steroids, he was given another chance when he fought Rico Rodriguez for the then vacant championship. But Rico outmuscled and outwrestled Randy as the much smaller man, and by the end of the fight, he was just left broken on the floor. It seemed like also, given his age, he'd won the belt twice before. What did this guy have left to prove? So what turned around his career then? Well, similar to Michael Bisping, it was definitely perseverance mixed with a little bit of opportunism. Yeah, because the UFC offered him an interim title fight against Chuck Liddell at light heavyweight. Most would have definitely said no, going up against a young and hungry guy in his prime that was this scary, but Randy couldn't say no.
That guy is a consummate competitor. He does not like to lose, and to lose twice in a row like that, that eats him up inside.
Even if the fans wished he did. But then this happened.
Couture is going to stop Chuck Liddell. Unbelievable! Unbelievable!
Randy Couture becomes the first man.
Unbelievable!
Like, you can hear it even now in the voice of Rogan. The statement that Randy was going to finish Chuck wasn't something anyone thought they were ever going to hear. Crazy enough, he actually did this again when he went into retirement, but then suddenly jumped back up to heavyweight and took out Tim Sylvia. Is there any wonder why Joe Rogan called this man his hero? So what did we learn from this video? MMA is one of the most unpredictable sports out there. Never count anyone out. Shout out to George Hutchinson for editing this video. You can check him out on his social medias right here. George, thank you very much, mate. Appreciate it. Of course, shout out to all of the Hall of Famers out there as well. Thank you very much, Hall of Famers, for all the support you guys give us every single month. We hope you enjoy the exclusive content you get your hands on. If you want to join them, the button's down below, the link's in the description. Become a Hall of Famer today. Either way, guys, hope you enjoyed this one. This was a lot of fun as well. Always nice, fun, empowering stories. Watching people bounce back from adversity. You can do it. You could bounce back.